a wealthy doctor mocked a humble patient. Years later, he needed urgent surgery and was shocked to see who the surgeon was. The clock was nearing midnight when Laura Gutierrez rushed into the luxurious reception area of Santa Esperanza Clinic. In her arms, she carried Emilia, her 7-year-old daughter, whose fragile body was struggling to remain conscious. Every breath the girl took was a painful gasp that filled Laura's eyes with tears. Desperation had driven her there, a place she knew she didn't belong, but it was her last hope. The clinic's atmosphere was cold and elegant, with crystal chandeliers illuminating walls adorned with expensive artwork. But Laura couldn't care less about the lavish surroundings. She hurried to the reception desk, where a nurse gave her a brief, indifferent glance, as if Laura's presence were a mere inconvenience. "Please, I need a doctor." "My daughter can't breathe," Laura pleaded, her voice trembling with fear. The nurse offered a fake smile. She asked for their details, but upon noticing Laura's modest clothing and exhausted expression, her tone turned colder. "Ma'am, this is a private clinic. Without insurance or an upfront payment, we can't admit you," the nurse stated mechanically, as though following a script. It felt as if the ground had collapsed beneath Laura. She had sold everything she had left, hoping to get help here. She emptied her pocket, placing a few coins on the desk. "This is all I have. Please, her life depends on it." Before the nurse could reply, a commanding voice echoed behind her. "What's going on here?" asked Dr. Fernando Martinez, the clinic's top surgeon, as he approached with an air of arrogance and a smug grin. Laura turned to him with desperation in her eyes. This man, dressed in an impeccable suit and wearing a luxury watch, was her last chance. "It's my daughter. She needs urgent help. Please," she begged. Fernando scanned her from head to toe, his gaze cold and dismissive. He saw nothing but trouble in her. He had no intention of ruining his day with a case that wouldn't benefit him financially. "We only treat paying patients here," he said with a mocking smirk. "I'm begging you, I'll do anything," Laura cried, holding Emilia's hand as her daughter struggled to breathe. Fernando interrupted without a trace of empathy. "This isn't a charity hospital, ma'am. Go to a public one before it's too late. We don't waste time here." Beside him, Isabel Carrasco, the clinic's financial director, watched with satisfaction. She had seen this scenario unfold countless times, and Fernando always knew how to handle it, with indifference. Laura felt her heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. The silent contempt in the eyes of the nearby staff was overwhelming. No one offered help. They were all passive witnesses to her humiliation. Clutching Emilia tightly, Laura whispered through her tears, "I'm sorry, sweetheart." With the last shred of dignity she had left, Laura turned and left the clinic under the indifferent stares of everyone present. Outside, the cold night air bit into her skin, but it was the silent promise in her heart that gave her the strength to keep moving. "One day, I will decide who gets to live and who doesn't, and I'll never let anyone suffer the way we did today." As her steps faded into the night, Fernando returned to his routine, unaware that this night would mark the beginning of his own downfall. The days following her humiliation at Santa Esperanza Clinic were the hardest of Laura's life. Every time she saw Emilia struggling to breathe, the weight on her heart grew unbearable. Giving up wasn't an option, not with her daughter fighting to survive. But public hospitals offered little relief, with insufficient treatment and long waiting lists. However, Laura clung to the promise she had made. One day, she would become the doctor that people like Emilia needed. Determined to change her life, Laura applied to medical school, securing a partial scholarship. But studying wasn't enough. The medical program was grueling, and she had to work to pay for Emilia's treatments and cover basic expenses. Laura took any job she could find, from cleaning offices to waiting tables at a small restaurant. Her days were endless. She attended anatomy and physiology classes in the morning and worked through the night. Sleep became a luxury, stolen in brief moments between shifts, while thoughts of her daughter kept her going. Despite her exhaustion, Emilia always greeted her with a bright smile. The road was harder than Laura had imagined. Most of her classmates came from wealthy families and ridiculed her modest clothes and quiet demeanor. She became an easy target for mockery, but she stood firm. She wasn't there to fit in. She was there to learn how to save lives. In that hostile environment, she met Dr. Mateo Reyes, a veteran surgeon known for his integrity and compassion. Mateo noticed Laura from the beginning, seeing in her a resilience few possessed. One day, after class, he approached her with words that would become a turning point in her life. "Medicine isn't for those seeking fame, it's for those who want to make the world a better place," Mateo said with a warm smile. Mateo became her mentor and guide, teaching her that compassion was the foundation of true medicine. No matter how many times life tried to break her, Mateo encouraged her to rise again and again. He shared stories of renowned doctors who had started with nothing but achieved greatness through dedication and kindness. For Laura, Mateo became more than a teacher. He became the father figure she had longed for. His guidance made her believe in herself and in the possibility of fulfilling her dream of becoming a doctor. Meanwhile, Emilia continued to battle her illness. Laura did everything in her power to keep her stable, but she knew the treatments were inadequate. Every labored breath from her daughter was a painful reminder of why she had chosen this path. Yet Emilia never complained. With her soft voice and radiant smile, she always found words of encouragement for her mother. "One day, you'll be the best doctor in the world, Mom. And I'll always be by your side, right?" Emilia would say, hugging her tightly every night before falling asleep. Those words were the fuel that kept Laura moving forward. She knew that although the future was uncertain, she couldn't stop. With each passing day, she got a little closer to her goal. And even as her daughter weakened, Laura promised herself that her sacrifice would not be in vain. While her classmates enjoyed their youth, parties and trips, Laura continued her exhausting routine without complaint. She spent nights reviewing notes during breaks at her jobs, imagining the day she would wear a white coat and help those in need, regardless of whether they had money or not. The vision of that future sustained her, even when everything around her seemed to be falling apart. As the months went by, Laura understood that medicine was not just an academic study. It was a reflection of life itself, constant sacrifices, tough decisions, and above all, unconditional love for those we serve. Mateo kept reminding her of that every time she wavered. "Being a doctor means giving, even when you have nothing left to offer," Mateo would say. "And you, Laura, are already the best doctor I've ever known. You just don't realize it yet." With those words in her heart, Laura pressed on. She knew the road would be long and the pain wouldn't fade soon, but she also understood that every step she took, every sleepless night, and every tear shed were part of the promise she'd made to Emilia. She would save lives, even if she could no longer save hers. The air inside the small apartment Laura and Emilia shared felt heavy. The girl's cough had become deeper and more frequent in recent days, and each breath was a silent battle that broke Laura's heart. Sleepless nights passed slowly, filled with uncertainty and fear. Laura did everything possible to stabilize Emilia with the limited resources she had, but she knew time was against them. The illness advanced relentlessly. That night, Emilia lay in bed, pale and tired-eyed, yet still held a faint smile on her lips. Laura sat beside her, gently stroking her hair as the little one tried to hide her pain behind the same smile she always used to comfort her mother. "Don't cry, Mom," Emilia whispered weakly, sensing the tears welling in Laura's eyes. "Everything will be okay. You've always been with me. You're my hero." Laura pressed her lips together to keep from breaking down, but emotions swelled in her chest. She had tried to be strong for so long, but at that moment, she felt her entire world crumbling. She knew she'd done everything possible, but couldn't help feeling powerless and frustrated for not being able to save the most important person in her life. "Forgive me, my love. I tried everything, but it wasn't enough," Laura said in a broken whisper, clutching Emilia's cold hand between hers. Emilia looked at her tenderly, as if wanting to convey the peace she was beginning to feel. She knew her body was slowly fading, but also knew her mum had given more than anyone ever could. "I'm proud of you, Mom. You're the bravest person I know. Promise me you'll never stop fighting, no matter what happens, okay?" Laura nodded with difficulty, feeling her heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. She kissed Emilia's forehead and enveloped her in an embrace she wished she'd never have to release. The little girl closed her eyes, breathing with difficulty, but with an almost supernatural calm. "I love you, Mum. Forever," Emilia whispered, before falling silent. Emilia's last breath was almost imperceptible. Laura felt her little hand lose strength in hers, and at that instant, she knew her daughter was gone. The room plunged into deep silence, broken only by the silent sobs of a mother who had lost her most precious treasure. Laura remained holding her daughter's lifeless body for hours, unable to let go, as if by doing so she'd acknowledged the most painful reality of all, that Emilia would no longer be by her side. Dawn arrived without Laura moving, frozen in her grief. She knew that the promise made to Emilia would be her only reason to carry on. The following days passed in a haze of sadness and exhaustion. Laura organized a small funeral with the help of some neighbors. Only a handful of people attended, but every word spoken and every tear shed was a tribute to the girl who, despite her short life, had touched the hearts of all who knew her. After the burial, Laura stayed alone by Emilia's grave, feeling the weight of loss settle in her chest. But amid the pain, she found the strength to make one last promise. "I'll do everything I can, Emilia. I'll become the doctor you needed, and I'll never let anyone go through what we did." With those words, Laura felt her heart, though broken, find a new reason to beat. The sadness would never completely disappear, but she decided that her love for Emilia would live on in every life she helped save. Back at the university, Laura delved even deeper into her studies, using her pain as fuel. Her classmates continued to look down on her, but she no longer cared what they thought. The sorrow of her loss had hardened her heart, but also ignited her desire to fulfill the promise she made to Emilia. Mateo Reyes, her mentor, noticed the change in Laura. The determination in her eyes was stronger than ever, but he also perceived the sadness hidden beneath the surface. "I know it's hard, Laura, but remember that being a doctor also means learning to live with loss. You won't be able to save everyone, but every effort is worth it," he said calmly, placing a hand on her shoulder. Laura nodded, knowing Mateo was right. Emilia was gone, but there were many lives that still depended on her efforts. Each past exam, every hospital practice, was another step toward the promise she made to her daughter. Emilia's death not only marked a before and after in Laura's life, but also taught her a valuable lesson. Medicine is not just about healing bodies, but also about mending souls. With every patient she attended during her training, she remembered her daughter and tried to give her best, as if in each life she helped improve, a part of Emilia lived on forever. Meanwhile, Fernando Martinez continued enjoying his life full of luxury, recognition, and prestige. His days were filled with successful surgeries for the city's elite, dinners at exclusive restaurants, and media praise. To him, medicine was a tool for social climbing, not a vocation to serve. However, he was unaware that his personal empire was beginning to crumble from within. Isabel Carrasco, the clinic's financial director, and Esteban Ramirez, his fellow surgeon, began secretly plotting his downfall. Isabel had noticed that Fernando, confident in his success, was becoming careless, taking risks in complex surgeries without proper preparation. Esteban, eager to take his place as the star surgeon, knew that destroying Fernando's reputation was key to seizing control of the clinic. First, Isabel started manipulating financial records, presenting cases of dissatisfied patients as covert negligence. Esteban, meanwhile, took advantage of every mistake Fernando made in the operating room to sow rumors among the medical staff. Complaints from supposed patients began to pile up, and soon malpractice lawsuits reached the courts. The press, always hungry for scandals, made Fernando the target of sensational headlines. "Star surgeon accused of negligence, genius or fraud," the newspapers blared. Accustomed to acclaim, Fernando couldn't understand how everything had turned against him. Initially, he denied the accusations, convinced he could navigate the situation with money and connections. But Isabel ensured all doors were closed, leaking false information that incriminated him further. The media storm intensified, and his social circle began to shun him. Within months, Fernando was fired from Santa Esperanza Clinic. His colleagues, who once flattered him, quickly distanced themselves, fearful of being associated with him. Without income, his name ruined, and no allies, Fernando found himself alone in his empty mansion. His wife, Claudia, seized the opportunity to file for divorce, taking their son, Adrian, and leaving Fernando amid his ruin. Deep in despair, Fernando tried to stay afloat, but no private clinic would hire him. Finally, he had to accept a position at a small public clinic in one of the city's poorest neighborhoods, San Andres Clinic. There, his life changed radically. San Andres Clinic was the opposite of everything Fernando had known. There were no state-of-the-art equipment or unlimited resources. His patients were people who could barely afford transportation to the clinic, let alone medical treatment. Initially, Fernando treated them with the same disdain he had always shown those without money. "Why bother coming here if you can't pay?" he would complain aloud, earning the disapproval of his new colleagues. However, he had no choice but to continue. The need to survive forced him to adapt. During one of his shifts at San Andres, he met Don Manuel, an elderly patient who came every week for advanced renal failure treatment. Manuel was kind and patient, though it was clear his health was rapidly deteriorating. Despite his condition, Manuel never complained. He arrived each week, sat in the same waiting room chair, and thanked all the doctors for their time, even if he only received palliative care. Intrigued by the elderly man's serene attitude, Fernando began to converse with him. "Why do you never lose that calm?" Fernando asked one day, frustrated by the emotional burden his new patients brought. Don Manuel smiled, wisdom reflected in his eyes. "I lost everything years ago, my family, my fortune, even my health. But the one thing you never lose is the chance to make peace with yourself and help others, even just a little. Life isn't about what you have, but what you give." Manuel's words resonated with Fernando more than he was willing to admit. Over the following weeks, their conversations grew deeper. Fernando began to see pain and poverty through different eyes. For the first time in his life, he felt empathy toward people he once considered invisible. Fernando's transformation was slow and painful. He resisted accepting that his old life was gone forever, but each day at the clinic was a new lesson. The humble patients, with their stories of struggle, awakened in him an understanding he'd never experienced before. He stayed longer hours at the clinic, operating with the limited resources available, and each time he managed to help someone, he felt a different kind of satisfaction, deeper than any he'd ever felt in opulence. He also began to notice something else: loneliness. He had lost everything he once considered important, but ironically, in the small neighborhood clinic, he found something he'd never had before: purpose. "Maybe I can't get my old life back, but I can do something meaningful here," he murmured one day, while reviewing patient files. Don Manuel became his first genuine friend, and his influence marked a real change in Fernando. Although the pain of betrayal, his family's abandonment, and the loss of his prestige still weighed on him, he gradually understood that redemption wasn't found in success, but in service. Fernando had begun to find a certain peace at the clinic, but life, relentless, had more lessons in store. One day, while attending patients, he felt a sharp pain in his chest. He tried to ignore it, but dizziness forced him to sit down. Shortly after, he collapsed on the clinic floor, unable to breathe. he was rushed to the nearest hospital. Fate had it that this hospital was the very one where Laura Gutierrez was doing her residency. When she reviewed the new patient's file and read the name Fernando Martinez, her heart skipped a beat. Life had placed before her the man who had destroyed her hopes of saving Emilia, now vulnerable and in need of her help. Laura's gaze hardened, and inside she felt all the resentment she'd harbored for years resurfacing. However, she knew that her internal battle was just beginning. Could she act with compassion toward the man who had once scorned her? Or would she succumb to the desire for revenge? The hospital was filled with the typical bustle of a busy afternoon, patients coming and going, but everything stopped for Laura when she read the name on the chart, Fernando Martinez. She stood still for a moment, feeling the weight of the past overtaking her. There, lying on a gurney, was the man who had denied her help when she needed it most. The same man who had condemned her daughter Emilia to a slow agony with his indifference. Laura clenched her fists, feeling the accumulated resentment of years surge like a dark tide. Fernando was unconscious, pale and fragile, far from the arrogant surgeon she'd met at Santa Esperanza Clinic. The irony of the situation hit her like a slap. Now she had the power to decide whether he would live or die. Dr. Mateo Reyes, always attentive to details, noticed the tension on Laura's face as he saw her beside Fernando's gurney. He knew this moment represented much more than a simple surgery. "Are you all right?" Mateo asked softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. Laura nodded mechanically, but inside she wrestled with a whirlwind of emotions. Fernando's words from that day at the clinic still echoed in her mind. Without money, there are no miracles. And now, that same man, stripped of his wealth and arrogance, depended on her compassion to survive. "And it's your decision whether to take this case or not, Laura. But remember one thing," Mateo said. "Medicine isn't a weapon for revenge. It's a promise to save lives, even when that life belongs to someone who doesn't deserve it." Laura left the room, seeking a moment of calm. Mateo's voice echoed in her mind, but the image of Emilia struggling to breathe without receiving the help she needed tore her apart from within. A part of her wanted to deny Fernando the treatment, to make him suffer as she and her daughter had. But another part, the one shaped under Mateo's guidance and her love for her vocation, knew she couldn't betray her principles. Sitting on a bench in the hospital, Laura relived the darkest moments of her life. Sleepless nights caring for Emilia, the silent funeral, and the promise she made to never give up. That promise, more than anything else, made her rise and return to the room where Fernando lay unconscious. "I'm going to operate on him," she told Mateo, her voice a blend of resolution and sadness. The surgical team quickly gathered. Everyone knew who the patient was, the once famous surgeon who had fallen from grace. The murmurs in the hallways spoke of the ironic fate that had brought him there. Some suggested that Fernando deserved to suffer, but Laura ignored the comments. She knew that every decision in the operating room was a test of her integrity. This surgery would not only test her medical skills, but also her ability to forgive. Fernando was taken to the operating room. Laura donned her surgical gloves, adjusted her mask, and took a deep breath. It didn't matter what she felt for him. Her duty as a doctor was to save him. Mateo, watching from a corner, nodded with a faint smile, recognizing the gravity of the moment. The surgery began. Laura's hands moved with the precision of an experienced surgeon, but her mind was filled with painful memories. Every incision she made took her back to the nights when Emilia struggled to breathe, with no one coming to her rescue. Anger and sadness threatened to overflow, but Laura kept them at bay. As she worked, Mateo remained by her side as a silent pillar of support. Laura knew that, although this operation was just one in her career, it would mark a before and after in her life. If she couldn't save Fernando, guilt would haunt her forever. If she did save him, she would need to find a way to make peace with the past. After hours of absolute concentration, the surgery reached its most critical moment. Fernando's heart, damaged by years of excesses and stress, required a delicate maneuver. Laura held her tools firmly, aware that a mistake could be fatal. Finally, after a tense minute of waiting, the heart monitor emitted a steady beep. Fernando's heart was beating normally again. The surgical team sighed in relief. Laura removed her gloves with trembling hands, knowing she had won more than a medical battle. She had overcome the resentment that had consumed her for years. Hours later, Fernando woke up in the recovery room, still groggy from the anesthesia. Upon opening his eyes, he saw Laura by his side. For a moment, he wasn't sure if he was dreaming. Laura's serene but cold expression made it clear that she had been the one to save his life. Fernando tried to speak, but his voice was barely a whisper. Were you the one who—" Laura nodded, maintaining her steady gaze. There were no words sufficient to express what they both felt at that moment. Overwhelmed by shame, Fernando could only lower his gaze, aware that the woman he had despised had proven to be greater than him in every way. "Thank you," he finally whispered, a lump in his throat. Laura did not respond. She stayed there a moment longer in silence before turning and leaving the room. She knew her path with Fernando was not over, but at least she had taken the first step toward redemption, saving the life of a man who had once denied her everything. The days following Fernando's surgery were a whirlwind of emotions for Laura. The success of the operation marked a professional triumph, but also opened emotional wounds she had been avoiding for years. Fernando continued to recover in the hospital, and although he was no longer in immediate danger, his soul seemed as fractured as his body. Both knew that sooner or later they would have to confront the past that both connected and separated them. Meanwhile, Laura tried to find refuge in her work. Every time she entered the clinic, her goal was to help those who needed it most, as if with each patient she could atone for the pain she had carried since Emilia's death. However, every time she passed by the room where Fernando rested, a mix of emotions shook her: resentment, anger, but also compassion. One day, Matteo stopped her in the hallways. "Laura, you've done more than many would have been capable of," he said with his calm voice. "But I know saving him hasn't closed all your wounds. There are things that medicine can't heal." Laura nodded silently. She knew Matteo was right. She had fulfilled her duty as a doctor, but there was an internal battle she still had to fight. Finding forgiveness, not only toward Fernando, but also toward herself for not being able to save Emilia. During his recovery, Fernando began to face the harsh reality of his life. Each day he woke up in the hospital bed, surrounded by humble patients and dedicated doctors, was a reminder of how much his world had changed. The man who once believed that wealth defined a person's worth now depended on the compassion of someone he had mercilessly humiliated. Fernando spent his days in silence, reflecting on every wrong decision that had led him to this point. The betrayal of his colleagues, the loss of his prestige, the abandonment by his family. Everything seemed to have crumbled in the blink of an eye. However, what weighed most on him was the memory of Laura, the woman who had saved his life despite all the harm he had caused her. Finally, he mustered the courage to ask to speak with her. He knew he needed to do something he had never done in his life: sincerely apologize. Laura entered the room with the same professional demeanor she always maintained, but her cold gaze betrayed the emotional storm she carried within. Fernando, still weak, slightly propped himself up in bed and looked at her with eyes full of shame. "I know I have no right to ask for anything," Fernando began, his voice broken by emotion. "But I wanted to thank you, and above all, to apologize. Not only for what I did that night, but for what I represented for so long." Laura crossed her arms, trying to maintain the emotional distance she had built over the years. "Apology?" she repeated harshly. "Do you think a few words are enough to erase what happened? My daughter died, Fernando. And you decided it wasn't worth helping her because she had no money." Fernando lowered his gaze, unable to bear his guilt. I know, and I will live with that weight for the rest of my days. But if there's one thing I've learned here, it's that money means nothing when you lose what truly matters." There was a long silence between them. Laura felt tears threatening to spill, but she didn't want to appear vulnerable. She had carried that resentment for so long that letting it go seemed impossible. However, deep in her heart, she knew that clinging to hate only kept her trapped in the past. "I can't forget what you did," Laura said, her voice trembling slightly. "But maybe I can learn to forgive. Not for you, but for me, and for Emilia." Fernando nodded, his eyes filled with gratitude. He knew he didn't deserve Laura's forgiveness, but hearing those words gave him a small spark of hope. He knew he had a long way to go to redeem himself, but he was willing to do it. In the following days, Fernando began to become more involved in the clinic. Although he was still weak, he helped in any way he could, organizing medications, conversing with patients, and offering support to the medical staff. Laura watched from a distance, seeing how the man who had once been arrogant and cold now found satisfaction in simple but meaningful tasks. One afternoon, Fernando approached Laura while they were both reviewing plans for a community initiative at the clinic. "I want to help build something here, if you'll allow me," Fernando said. "I know I can't change the past, but I want to do something that makes a difference." Laura looked at him silently for a moment, weighing his words. She knew Fernando couldn't undo the harm he had caused, but she also saw a genuine change in him. After all, both had lost something important in their lives, and perhaps by working together they could find a way to heal their wounds. "If you really want to help," she finally said, "there's a lot to do here." That was the first step toward a shared purpose. Both, from different paths, found a new reason to move forward in the clinic. Although the past still haunted them, they knew that every life they touched was a way to redeem what they had lost. The hospital continued to operate at its usual pace, but the relationship between Laura and Fernando had begun to evolve. While they hadn't healed all the wounds of the past, both were starting to find a purpose in the clinic that united them. However, fate had one last test in store that would challenge their strength and willpower. One day, while Laura was reviewing patient medical records, she received an urgent call from a foreign investigator. It was about Emilia. Although her daughter had passed away, the doctors continuing to study her case had found a promising experimental treatment for the pulmonary disease she had suffered from. However, they still needed volunteers for clinical trials. The discovery was bittersweet. Emilia couldn't benefit from the treatment, but her legacy could save many lives. However, access to the treatment required resources and contacts that Laura didn't have. "What do you plan to do?" Matteo asked, noticing the worry in Laura's eyes. Laura didn't know how to respond. On one hand, she felt she should do everything possible to support the development of the treatment. On the other, the effort reminded her of the pain of losing Emilia. The only certainty was that she couldn't do it alone. Fernando, aware of the situation, decided to help. Despite having lost most of his fortune, he still had some contacts in the medical world. With the help of his son Adrian, who had begun to slowly reconnect with him after years of estrangement, Fernando reached out to a group of researchers and hospitals that could contribute to the project. "I know I can't make up for what happened with Emilia," Fernando said to Laura, "but I want to do something meaningful. This is the least I can do." Laura, although surprised, accepted his help. She knew the path would not be easy, but she also understood that it was a way to transform pain into something positive. Fernando was willing to fight for a greater purpose, not only to redeem himself, but also so that Emilia's story would have a lasting impact. Laura and Fernando worked side by side to secure the necessary funds and resources. Through international contacts and community efforts, they managed to assemble a team of specialists willing to launch clinical trials at the clinic Laura had dreamed of, Emilia's Hope Clinic. The project quickly took shape. They were not only aiming to treat the disease, but also to create a space where low-income patients could access advanced treatments regardless of their financial situation. The clinic would become a symbol of what Emilia represented: hope for those who had been forgotten by the system. One day before the first clinical trials were to begin, Fernando met with Laura in the clinic's office. They were reviewing the final details of the project, but there was something more they wanted to say to each other. "Thank you for letting me be part of this," Fernando said, looking at her with sincerity. "You don't know how much this means to me." Laura looked at him silently, feeling a mix of emotions. It had been a long and difficult journey, but in that moment, she realized that although she could never forget the past, she could choose not to live trapped in it. "Emilia would be proud of what we're doing," Laura finally responded. "And in a way, I believe she will always be here with us." They shared a meaningful glance. Without needing more words, they understood that although forgiveness did not erase the scars, it allowed them to move forward. The next day, Emilia's Hope Clinic officially opened its doors. The first families arrived with the hope of receiving the experimental treatments, and the medical team, inspired by Laura and Fernando's story, worked tirelessly to provide the best care for each patient. Fernando, although still dealing with the ghosts of his past, found solace in his work. He knew he couldn't change what he had done, but every life he helped save was a small form of redemption. Adrian, his son, also began to get more involved in the clinic, seeking to learn from his father and Laura. Slowly, the broken pieces of their lives began to fit together. The atmosphere at Emilia's Hope Clinic was charged with expectations and tension. Laura and Fernando had worked tirelessly to get the clinical trials underway, and finally, the day had arrived. Families with children suffering from pulmonary diseases similar to Emilia's began to arrive from different parts of the city. Some patients were accompanied by their mothers, with the same hopeful eyes that Laura had once carried during the most difficult moments with her daughter. For Laura, each step in this project was like walking a tightrope between the pain of the past and the hope for a better future. Every child that arrived was a reminder of what she had lost, but also of what she could still achieve. Fernando, for his part, had set aside his old ego. He had become a committed collaborator, willing to help in whatever was necessary, even though he was still dealing with the shadow of his past. The experimental treatment required precision, time, and faith in the most advanced medical procedures. The team of researchers led the initial trials with caution, while the parents anxiously awaited any sign of improvement in their children. Laura was involved in every aspect of the project, coordinating the doctors, reviewing reports, and ensuring that the families understood each step of the process. But although her mind was focused on the patients, her heart still carried the loss of Emilia. Fernando watched Laura from a distance, admiring her strength. He knew she carried an emotional burden greater than she showed, and that each day at the clinic was an internal struggle. There were moments when Laura would stay alone in her office, reviewing Emilia's old files, as if searching them for answers she had yet to find. One afternoon, while the clinic was going about its usual pace, Laura found a moment to rest in her office. She sat at her desk and took out a small notebook that had belonged to Emilia. It was her most treasured possession, filled with drawings and little notes the girl had written during her last days. Laura slowly turned the pages, feeling the memories wash over her. On one of the last pages, she found a message Emilia had left her. "Mom, even if I'm not here, I'll always be with you. Be the best doctor in the world and help those who need it the most. I love you forever." Tears began to run down her face as she caressed the letters written in her daughter's clumsy handwriting. That message reminded her why she was there. Emilia had not only been her reason to start this journey, but continued to be her daily inspiration. That same afternoon, Laura was interrupted by an urgent message from the medical team. One of the children participating in the experimental treatment, a little boy named Samuel, had suffered a severe respiratory complication. The procedure was still in the experimental phase, and adverse reactions were unpredictable. If they didn't act quickly, Samuel might not survive the night. Laura rushed to the intensive care area, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew what was at stake, not only for Samuel, but for all the families who had placed their hope in that treatment. Fernando also arrived at the room, observing the situation with seriousness. Samuel was connected to a ventilator, and the doctors were trying to stabilize him, but nothing seemed to work. "We need to perform an immediate intervention," one of the doctors said, looking to Laura for approval. The procedure was risky, and Laura knew it. There were no guarantees of success, but they couldn't do nothing. The desperate look in Samuel's mother's eyes met Laura's, silently begging her to save her son. It was the same look Laura had had the day she brought Emilia to Santa Esperanza Clinic. That emotional connection momentarily paralyzed her, but she quickly regained her composure. "We will proceed with the intervention," Laura responded with determination. "Prepare the operating room." Laura and Fernando entered the operating room together, as if fate had united them for that moment. Laura led the operation, but she knew she would need Fernando's experience to get through. The boy was in critical condition, and every second counted. The operating room lights illuminated the scene as the monitors emitted constant beeps that kept everyone on edge. Laura moved with surgical precision, while Fernando assisted her at every step. There was no room for errors. Both worked in silence, but with perfect synchronicity. It was as if each knew what the other needed without needing to speak. Samuel's heart stopped beating for a moment, and the monitor emitted a high-pitched beep that froze the air in the room. Laura felt time stand still. The image of Emilia, in her last moments, flashed through her mind. But instead of succumbing to despair, she gritted her teeth and acted with determination. "Set it to 150, Laura ordered, preparing the defibrillator. Fernando quickly handed her the paddles, and Laura delivered the shock. The boy's body convulsed, but the monitor remained silent. There was no time to doubt. They delivered a second shock, and then a third. Finally, after what seemed like hours, the monitor emitted a steady beep. Samuel's heart had started beating again. A sigh of relief swept through the room. Laura removed her mask and let out a trembling breath. They had succeeded in saving him. As they left the operating room, Laura leaned against the wall, feeling the tension slowly leave her. Fernando approached her, also visibly exhausted. "You did well," he said sincerely. Laura looked at him, her eyes still glassy with emotion. For the first time in a long time, she felt she had fulfilled the promise she made to Emilia, to help those who needed it most, regardless of the circumstances. "I didn't do it alone," Laura replied, acknowledging Fernando's support. They shared a moment of silent gratitude, knowing that this triumph was more than just a successful surgery. They had saved a life together, and in doing so, had taken another step toward redemption and forgiveness. The next day, Samuel woke up in the intensive care unit. Although he still needed time to recover, his vital signs were stable. His mother, with tears in her eyes, hugged Laura and Fernando, thanking them for giving her son a new chance. "Thank you for giving us a new opportunity," the mother said through sobs. Laura and Fernando exchanged a meaningful glance. Both knew that, although they couldn't change the past, every life saved was a way to honor Emilia and heal the wounds they carried in their souls. Days at Emilia's Hope Clinic passed with an intensity that did not diminish. The success of Samuel's procedure had brought hope to families and the medical team, but it also left Laura and Fernando with unresolved emotions. Despite working together and sharing the responsibility of the clinic, there was a silent barrier between them, the weight of the past. Both knew that, although they had saved a life, the most difficult battle was still being fought within themselves. Resentment, guilt, and the need for forgiveness continued to linger in the clinic's hallways, waiting to be confronted. As Fernando continued to get involved in the clinic's daily operations, his relationship with his son, Adrian, began to heal slowly. After years of resentment and emotional abandonment, Adrian had accepted working at the clinic as an administrative assistant, watching attentively the changes in his father. One afternoon, while reviewing documents in the office, Adrian decided to break the silence that had long existed between them. "Dad, I've been thinking," he began, carefully choosing his words. "I never understood why you disappeared from my life. And now that you're here, helping this clinic, it's hard for me to understand how you changed so much." Fernando sighed, aware that this conversation was inevitable. "I lost my way, Adrian. For a long time I thought the important things were money, fame, recognition. And when I lost it all, I realized none of that made sense. I was empty. And now, I'm trying to find something worthwhile." Adrian looked at him for a long moment, evaluating the sincerity in his words. "Did you find it here?" he finally asked. Fernando nodded firmly. "Yes, I found it here. With Laura, with the patients, and most importantly, with you." Adrian said nothing more, but a slight smile appeared on his face. For the first time in years, he felt that his father was trying to be the man he had always needed. Laura, for her part, continued to grapple with the emotional dilemma that Fernando represented. There were moments when she felt she could forgive him, but others when the memory of Emilia and the humiliation she suffered paralyzed her. She knew that to truly move forward, they needed to talk about what had happened. One night, after the clinic had closed, Laura found Fernando sitting alone in the waiting room. The dim light of the place created an intimate atmosphere, almost as if the clinic itself was giving them permission to confront their ghosts. "Fernando," she called softly, and he looked up. "We need to talk." Fernando nodded, knowing that moment would come sooner or later. Laura sat down across from him, her hands intertwined as she tried to find the right words. "I don't know if I can ever forget what you did," Laura began, her voice laden with emotion. "When you rejected me at Santa Esperanza Clinic, I felt like the whole world was turning its back on me. It wasn't just the humiliation. It was the feeling that my daughter was worthless to you. That wound, it doesn't go away." Fernando lowered his gaze, unable to meet her eyes filled with pain. "I know. There isn't a single day I don't regret what I did. And I know I can't change it. But what I can do is try to be better. For you, for the patients, for myself." There was a long silence between them. Laura knew Fernando had changed, but forgiveness wasn't something she could grant so easily. "I'm not doing this for you, Fernando," Laura continued, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm doing it for me. Because if I can't find a way to let go of this resentment, I can never be free from the past. Emilia wouldn't want me to live trapped in this pain." Fernando felt the tears threatening to spill, but held them back. He knew those words were a gift more significant than he could ever ask for. "Thank you, Laura. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I promise I'll do everything I can to earn your trust." After that conversation, something changed between Laura and Fernando. Although the scars of the past remained, they began to work together more smoothly. Both knew that the path to redemption and reconciliation was long, but they were willing to walk it together. Fernando became even more involved in the clinic, guiding young doctors and sharing with them the lessons he had learned through his mistakes. Laura, for her part, began to trust him more, seeing how his transformation was genuine. The clinic's project continued to grow, and soon more families came seeking treatments. Laura and Fernando organized community health programs, ensuring that no one else would have to go through what they had experienced. The indifference of a system that valued money more than human lives. Laura, although surprised, accepted his help. She knew the path would not be easy, but she also understood that it was a way to transform pain into something positive. Fernando was willing to fight for a greater purpose, not only to redeem himself, but also so that Emilia's story would have a lasting impact. Laura and Fernando worked side by side to secure the necessary funds and resources. Through international contacts and community efforts, they managed to assemble a team of specialists willing to launch clinical trials at the clinic Laura had dreamed of, Emilia's Hope Clinic. The project quickly took shape. They were not only aiming to treat the disease, but also to create a space where low-income patients could access advanced treatments regardless of their financial situation. The clinic would become a symbol of what Emilia represented: hope for those who had been forgotten by the system. One day before the first clinical trials were to begin, Fernando met with Laura in the clinic's office. They were reviewing the final details of the project, but there was something more they wanted to say to each other. "Thank you for letting me be part of this," Fernando said sincerely. "You don't know how much this means to me." Laura smiled, moved by the young man's words. "It wasn't just for him, Adrian. It was for all of us. Sometimes life gives us second chances, and I think we all need them." Adrian nodded, understanding the weight of her words. From a distance, Fernando watched his son and Laura with a mixture of pride and gratitude. He knew that, although his life wouldn't be perfect, he now had the opportunity to build something real and meaningful. The clinic was not only a place of healing for the patients, it had also become a space of healing for themselves. As the days passed, Laura and Fernando found peace in their joint work. Forgiveness was not a one-time moment, but a constant process, a path they walked day by day. Every patient's smile, every thank you from a family, was a small victory in their healing journey. Although the scars of the past would never completely disappear, both learned that redemption and forgiveness were possible. It wasn't about erasing the past, but about learning from it and building something better for the future. The months following the official opening of Emilia's Hope Clinic were intense but rewarding. Each day, Laura and Fernando worked side by side to attend to the most needy patients. The clinic had grown beyond their initial expectations, becoming a refuge for those who couldn't find help elsewhere. However, the true impact wasn't just in the treatments provided, but in the change both had experienced in their hearts. The routine at the clinic was no longer that of a simple medical center. It had become a community. Patients didn't just come seeking treatments, but also hope and comfort. Every day, Laura felt she was fulfilling the promise she made to Emilia, to provide help regardless of circumstances, with love and compassion, just as her daughter would have wanted. Fernando, for his part, had found a purpose in the clinic that he never had in his previous life. Although his body was more weakened by the years and past excesses, his spirit was stronger than ever. He had become a mentor to young doctors, helping them avoid the mistakes he had made. Adrian, becoming closer to his father, began to take a more active role in the clinic. He was determined to learn everything he could from Laura and Fernando, inspired by his father's transformation and the impact the clinic was having on so many lives. The anniversary of the clinic's inauguration was approaching, and Laura decided it was the right time to organize a ceremony in honor of Emilia. It would be a symbolic celebration, not only to remember her daughter, but also to acknowledge all the families who had found hope in the clinic. "I want this event to be more than just a ceremony," Laura told Fernando and Adrian as they planned the details. "I want us to celebrate life, love, and everything we've achieved together. This isn't just about Emilia, it's about every life we touch here." Fernando nodded with a smile, moved by Laura's words. He knew that, although the scars of the past still lingered, this event would mark a new beginning for everyone. The community rallied around the preparations. Doctors, nurses, and volunteers collaborated to organize a special day filled with activities for patients and their families. During the ceremony, there would be music, patient testimonials, and an emotional speech by Laura. On the day of the ceremony, the sun shone brightly, as if even the weather wanted to join them in that special moment. The clinic was adorned with flowers and colors, and families began to arrive early. Laura and Fernando moved among the attendees, greeting each person warmly. The atmosphere was filled with gratitude and emotion. One of the most moving moments was when Samuel's mother, the little boy who had been saved in the operating room months earlier, took the stage. With tears in her eyes, she thanked Laura and Fernando for giving her son a second chance. "You didn't just save his life," the mother said, looking at both of them. "You also gave us hope. And that's priceless." Her words resonated deeply with Laura and Fernando. They both knew that the clinic was not just a place of physical healing, but also a space where people could find the strength to move forward, no matter the difficulties. Despite their achievements, Fernando knew his time at the clinic was coming to an end. His body could no longer keep up with the clinic's hectic pace, and although he didn't say it aloud, Laura sensed that his health was slowly deteriorating. Still, he clung to each day with gratitude, feeling that he had found a redemption he never thought possible. One afternoon, after the ceremony, Fernando called Laura and Adrian to his office. He had something important to tell them. "I've made a decision," Fernando said, looking at them calmly. "It's time for me to retire. This clinic is the future, and I want both of you to continue building it together." Laura felt a lump in her throat. She knew this moment would come, but she wasn't prepared to say goodbye to Fernando. Over the past months, he had become an ally, a mentor, and in some way, a family member. "Fernando, you don't have to leave," Laura said, trying to hold back her emotions. "Yes, I do," he replied with a smile. "But this time, I want to do it right. It's time to make way for the next generation." Adrian nodded silently, understanding the importance of his father's words. He knew that, although Fernando would leave, his legacy would live on in every corner of the clinic. The day Fernando left the clinic was simple but emotional. There were no grand speeches or ceremonious farewells, just sincere hugs and words of thanks from the staff and patients. Laura accompanied him to the door, feeling that although they were parting physically, their bond would endure forever. "Thank you, Laura," Fernando said before leaving. "Thank you for giving me a second chance." Laura hugged him, feeling a peace she never thought possible. "Thank you, Fernando. Emilia would be proud of what we've accomplished." With Fernando retired, Laura and Adrian took the reins of the clinic with renewed energy. Emilia's Hope Clinic continued to grow, becoming a symbol of hope for the entire community. Every patient attended, every life saved, was a way to honor Emilia's memory and the legacy of those who had fought for that dream. Laura finally found the peace she had been seeking. Although she would never forget the pain of losing her daughter, she had transformed that suffering into a force that drove her forward. And in every patient's smile, every received thank you, she felt that Emilia was there, accompanying her every step of the way. Forgiveness is not about forgetting, but about learning to live with the scars of the past and finding peace amidst the pain. Through their work at the clinic, Laura and Fernando had demonstrated that redemption is possible even for those who believe they have lost everything. Reflection. The story of Laura and Fernando is a powerful testament to human fragility, loss, forgiveness, and redemption. It reminds us that life, despite its harshness and unexpected turns, always offers us the opportunity to rebuild, to heal, and to find purpose amid suffering. Through their painful journey, both characters learn that there is no simple way to leave the past behind, but there is a way to live with it without being chained by it. Laura, upon losing her daughter Emilia, faces one of the most devastating tragedies a mother can experience. Her daughter's death marks her life with a deep wound, a wound that seeks not to be forgotten, but to be transformed. Every step she takes in her medical career, every life she helps save, is a conscious attempt to honor Emilia, to ensure her memory endures in acts of kindness toward those who, like her, were rejected or marginalized for lacking sufficient resources. Through her grief, Laura discovers that love does not disappear with loss. It transforms into strength, determination, and an unwavering purpose. Emilia remains alive in every decision Laura makes, in every patient she extends a hand to, turning her own tragedy into a beacon of hope for others. On the other hand, Fernando is a reflection of human arrogance and the false illusion that a person's worth is measured by their success, power, or wealth. Fernando's downfall not only destroys his career and reputation, but also forces him to confront a truth he had avoided his entire life: that material possessions are not enough to give life meaning. By losing everything he once considered important, Fernando finds himself in the void of his own loneliness, compelled to recognize the spiritual poverty that accompanied him even in his days of glory. It is in that moment of absolute vulnerability that he discovers that true wealth lies in selfless service and the human connections he had long neglected. His encounter with Laura and the opportunity to redeem himself becomes his lifeline, the only way to find meaning amid the wreckage of his life. The relationship between Laura and Fernando shows us that forgiveness is a difficult path, a process that isn't resolved in a single moment. For Laura, forgiving Fernando is not merely a moral choice, it is a necessity to free herself from the resentment that threatened to consume her entirely. Forgiving him does not mean justifying what he did or erasing the memory of her daughter. On the contrary, it means understanding that forgiveness is not for the other person, but for oneself, to let go of the weight of hate and find inner peace. Fernando, for his part, understands that forgiveness is not something he can demand or expect. It is something he must earn with humility, sincere actions, and the willingness to accept the consequences of his mistakes. Throughout his time at the clinic, Fernando learns that redemption is not a destination, but a journey walked each day, with every life he touches and every opportunity he takes to do good. The story also teaches us that although the scars of the past never disappear, they can become reminders of our ability to change and grow. Both Laura and Fernando carry the marks of their pain, but instead of allowing them to define them, they choose to use them as a driving force to transform their lives. The clinic they build together is not just a place of physical healing. It is a space where emotional wounds also find relief, where second chances become new beginnings. It is a place that reflects the possibility that even in the darkest situations, there is always room for hope and compassion. The bond that develops between Laura and Fernando is complex, filled with silences, tensions, and moments of doubt, but also with small gestures that show that human connection can heal even the deepest wounds. They are not two people who become friends or inseparable companions, but two wounded souls who find in their collaboration a way to reconcile with the past. Through their joint work, they learn that true purpose lies not in immediate rewards, but in the satisfaction of knowing that every effort, no matter how small, impacts someone else's life. Finally, the story invites us to reflect on the value of second chances. No one is exempt from making mistakes, from getting lost in their own ambition, or from failing at critical moments. But also, no one is exempt from the possibility of changing, of learning from their errors, and of finding a different path. Fernando's transformation reminds us that it is never too late to try to be better, while Laura's strength teaches us that even the most devastating losses can become the foundation of something beautiful and meaningful. In the end of their journey, Laura and Fernando do not find a happy ending in the traditional sense, but they do find something much more valuable: peace. The peace that arises from forgiveness, acceptance, and service to others. Both understand that life is a continuous process of falling and rising, of loss and discovery, and that what truly matters is not avoiding suffering, but finding a way to give it meaning. Through their story, we discover that true greatness does not lie in success or in the absence of mistakes, but in the ability to learn, to change, and to love, even when it seems that everything is lost. And so we reach the end of this story filled with emotions, lessons, and second chances. The story of Laura and Fernando reminds us that we all carry scars, but also that each day is a new opportunity to heal, forgive, and redeem ourselves. Life won't always be fair, and it will often challenge us with difficult trials, but it is in those moments that we discover what we are made of. It's not about avoiding mistakes, but about learning from them and moving forward with a stronger and more compassionate heart. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to continue joining us in more tales filled with hope and deep reflections. Every story is a reminder that love, compassion, and forgiveness can change everything, even in the darkest moments. Share this video with someone you think needs to hear this story today. Thank you for being part of this community and for witnessing stories that invite us to reflect and become better each day. See you in the next chapter of life. And remember, although scars never disappear, there is always room for redemption and hope. Until next time.